My name is Christine Roberts. I'm the Vice President General Manager of Twilio's Super Network. You'll be hearing a little bit more from me in the keynote tomorrow. But today I want to talk about what you just saw in the keynote today. And that topic is conversations. And how many people were pretty freaking excited after they saw the conversations? If nothing else, exciting to see a penguin on stage. So, and you know, the examples that Jeff used and Simon used, where it was a one-way conversation, it certainly wasn't interactive, it certainly wasn't personal. I think it brings it home of just how exciting this area can be and how engaging this area can be. You know, as we were running through rehearsals this weekend, I was thinking about a recent situation where I was flying from San Francisco to the UK on a red eye. And, you know, I got the text saying, of course, the flight's delayed and there's an issue with your seat. And, you know, I really wanted to stay in that conversation. Instead, I picked up the phone and called, you know, United, because of course it was United. Sorry, we love United, but they have problems with that flight sometimes. And you know, so this particular topic really resonates with me because I think it can become very personal and very understandable very quickly. And, you know, we believe that there is no perfect channel. You know, I was talking to the guys earlier, and you know, they talked about the fact that of meeting our customers where they are. And I think that that's just such a great soundbite because it really is about that. It's about engaging with your customers in the way that they want to be engaged. And, you know, my daughter doesn't even think of, I have a 16-year-old daughter. I accept all of your sympathy. But my daughter doesn't even think about SMS versus Hangouts versus WhatsApp versus Facebook Messenger. She doesn't even think about it that way. She was interacting with a friend, and I asked her, I said, well, how did you copy and paste that? And, you know, what were you doing you know, with your SMS? And she's like, oh, you know, XYZ. And I'm like, you can't do that with an SMS. And she's like, well, I'm in Hangouts. And I'm like, well, that's not an SMS. You know, the kids don't even think about it that way. For them, this is just, there's a million different ways to communicate, and they leverage every single one of those ways that they possibly can. And so today's panel is about a broader discussion of how the notion of conversations and the concept could change the way that we all do business and that we all interact with folks. So we're going to hear from three great folks today from different areas. And we'll really focus this panel on how they're using or how they're thinking about this topic of conversations and about how every conversation matters. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pramod. Please introduce yourself, Pramod. Tell me who you are, what your company does, and yeah. How'd you learn about Twilio?
Hi guys, my name is Pramod Soke. I'm a product manager at Ancestry. As a lot of people know it as Ancestry.com. It's weird, you know, every time I say Ancestry, people always ask, Ancestry.com? Like, yeah, right, you know, it's the same company. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, you know, a year ago was when I started Ancestry and, you know, started looking at solutions to enable messaging between our customers. And, you know, there were, I think, about 15 different companies that showed up on that list. But then as I dug deeper, it became very clear that Twilio was the one that we wanted to go with. So that's how I heard about it.
Awesome. All right. Jason, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us about you and how you came to know Twilio.
Yeah, my name is Jason Brand. I'm a product manager at Podium. We're an interaction management platform for local businesses. And the way we think about local businesses, a business that you work with in person. And so that might be the tire shop on the corner, or it might be, you know, a national brand that we all recognize and have come provide services in our home. And I think, you know, the Podium's not been around for very long. We've grown very quickly, but so in the last 5 years, we've, you know, gone from 0 to about 35,000 customers, and Twilio's been with us since the very beginning. And you know, we'll talk more about how that works. But
yeah, what I love about Podium is they give us quick and candid feedback, which makes us get better really fast. But that's a really good thing. So Nick, please.
Sure. My name is Nick Weiklin. I'm an engineering manager at Deliveroo. Deliveroo is a food delivery company. We're based out of the UK. We're one of the UK's tech unicorns. We're in 14 different markets across Europe, Middle East, and Asia Pacific. I'm an engineering manager there. my teams are responsible for everything that happens to the customer after they've placed an order. So that includes kind of giving them information about exactly where their food is and when it's going to arrive, and that also includes helping out should things go wrong. We basically heard of Twilio because my engineers start using everything, and then they come to me and they say, go talk to Howard and let us operationalize that.
Great, thanks so much. We heard in the keynote that 80% of consumers want to have conversations with businesses. So what are you doing within your businesses today to enable those kind of conversations?
Yeah, so with Ancestry, we have a bunch of use cases. Right? One is customers come to make personal discoveries, and they find out more about their ancestors. They discover that they have relatives that they didn't know they had. And if you think about it, there's an inherent community within Ancestry that always exists. But the communication between them, that was the piece that was missing, and that's what we're doing with Twilio, right? So it's real-time messaging between these customers who, they're doing a lot of research on their families. They reach out to other members that they have more information about, or they have more questions about, and so that's one type. The other type is there are a lot of power users who are always doing a lot of research, right? So they have a lot of information about other customers that they want to reach out to and offer up that information, right? So it's customer to customer, but in a way, it's there's a slight business aspect to it as well, right? If you think about it, like these are the ones who have all the research for the other customers that they're reaching out to. And then the third one is, this is what we're still enabling is we have what they call pro genealogists, who are professional genealogists who to whom customers go to for additional information, and so they exchange information there as well. So it's it's multifaceted, and also these conversations, they're pretty intense, right? You're making discoveries about your families, all this information that you didn't know you had. So messaging is, it's a little different for us as opposed to business to customer.
And Nick, you have a really interesting model in Deliveroo, and you described it to us as like a three-sided marketplace. Talk a little bit about that in the context of conversations.
Yeah, sure. So obviously we have 3 different sets of customers who all have different sets of needs. We have our customers, we have our riders, and then we have our restaurants. So customers are the folks who are eating. They want their food, they want it on time. Our riders, they want flexibility, they want more earnings. And our restaurants, they want more business. They want to sell more food. And what we found is that by helping those folks to get in touch with each other directly, we can avoid these really painful, what we call switchboard conversations, which is where somebody else has the information, but they need to contact us and then have us forward them on to somebody else. So an example for that might be if you're ordering from a restaurant, you're ordering some salmon, and the restaurant happens to be out of salmon. So what you can do is you can call Deliveroo customer care, and then we can say, really sorry, just wait on hold, we'll call the restaurant, da-da-da. Or what we can do is we can enable a direct conversation with the restaurant via private, secure messaging or phone calling. You can talk with them, and they can say, hey, we don't have any salmon, but maybe we have something else that's really nice. So, yeah.
Great, thanks. And for Podium, it's interesting because Podium is a platform built on Twilio as a platform, but it's an interactive platform for local businesses. So talk about it a little bit in the context of Podium.
Yeah, so we empower our customers to open up the type of communication, just like was talked about in the keynote today. So making it so when they're sending out notifications of things, there is someone on the other end who can respond. And so, as we've grown, that's primarily started via SMS, but has quickly grown into other conversation channels as well, depending on the type of business and also where the person is in the world. Their expectations about which channel might be most convenient is different. And so the way we go about that is, we're oftentimes sending out messages that might be related to notifications or times when the business needs to get feedback or answer a question from the consumer. And then we also open up ways for consumers to get in touch with businesses in convenient ways, so that when I'm trying to schedule an oil change or get in touch with my dentist, I have an option to send a message. And it might be SMS, it might be Facebook Messenger, it might be WhatsApp, depending on where I am, if I'm on their website or if I'm on their Facebook page. But then ultimately allowing the business to handle that conveniently in one place and collaborate as they solve the problem and respond to the customer.
maybe you guys can get a little more specific on what those specific conversations look like and how, whether it's a chat with internal users or their SMS conversations or, agent to customer or, give me let's get specific because I think that's really interesting for the audience is to understand what those interactions look like today.
Yeah, sure. I mean, a really specific example for us is, so when your rider is trying to find you to give you your food, right? It's obviously a really key moment, and if we don't get that right, then you're not getting the core promise of what we're offering. So for us, what we found is that we initially built rider-to-customer calling with Twilio. So we use Twilio to help maintain the privacy of everybody in that relationship. And what we've done recently, and Jacob will actually be talking about it tomorrow if you guys want to hear all the finer details, is we've built chat between those two parties. And the reason behind that is that there are lots of occasions when you might not want to have a phone call. So a good example that we heard is like if people's babies are sleeping. And it happens really often, and the last thing you want if you finally got your baby to sleep is to have somebody ringing the doorbell with your food and then waking them up. So you can kind of text like, hey, the baby's sleeping, I will be outside, please don't ring the doorbell. Or even things like gate codes, or if you're in an office block, sometimes there's 57 entrances, and you can say like, hey, I'll meet you by the Starbucks or whatever.
So, as I mentioned earlier, there are multiple types of conversations, right? At a high level, SMS is what we use for transactional notifications, right? When you have your kid status updated and things like that. But with conversations themselves specifically, one of the classic cases is Ancestry just told me that I have a second cousin who lives in Ohio, right? So, yeah, right? And so it's very common for, in these cases, for me to reach out to that person and say, hey, we just found out that we're cousins. Would you like to stay connected and learn more about the rest of our family? And this is something that we're working on is a lot of customers don't know how to approach that conversation, right? You're reaching out to somebody, you don't know if they're welcoming of that or not. And so that's one of the areas that we're looking at helping them out. The other type of conversation is, users who've been doing a lot of research on, they reach out to other customers and say, hey, I know you and I have the same family, right? So we may be related very distantly, but we have all this information, offering up all the information for them to share all that stuff, so they learn more about it.
Yeah, so I think a couple of interesting cases, some I've mentioned before, is that oftentimes there are a number of channels involved depending on where the consumer is in the world or where they found the business, or if the business is looking to notify them, that determines what channel we'll use for the communication. And we want to make that convenient so that kind of like you mentioned with your daughter, that the consumer doesn't really have to think about it. They're just communicating and getting things taken care of for them and their family. An interesting case that we've run into a lot recently is, oftentimes maybe there's some sensitivity to the conversation that a customer is angry or frustrated or needs something quickly. And what we found is that in a lot of cases, the reaction to that by the business was, I'm on my phone, so I'm going to take a screenshot, or on a computer, I'm going to forward an email and try and get that into the channel where we communicate internally as a business, not we being the business that's the customer of Podium. And so what we've been working on is helping them to handle that internally alongside the conversation they're having with their own customer. And so there's no more forwarding emails and taking screenshots and texting them to each other, but that they can have that inside of Podium alongside the conversation they're having with their customer, which might be on a different channel, but it helps them to have it in context. And maybe a little bit unique case to us, but I think in the same idea that we've been talking, that it's helping bring conversations together in a way that makes sense and focus on getting the job done rather than worrying about getting the information across and how it's going to get there.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting lead-in. Do you think about conversations with your internal teams, do you think about those conversations differently than you think about kind of between your internal teams and, in the case of Deliveroo, you've got multiple customers, but do you think about enabling your internal conversations in a different way than you would enable kind of your outside customer conversations? Do you think about that differently? Do you think that there's a difference there, or do you think it's all the same? Give me your perspective on that.
I can continue a little bit on that. As I mentioned, I think as we're enabling that for our customers, one thing we have to be really cautious of is so that they know they're communicating internally and not to their customers. Because I'm sure they always say really nice things about their customers, but just in case, that could lead to them being embarrassed. And another is like controlling who has access to those conversations internally as well, whether it's a conversation between the business and the customer or internal team of the business, and helping them to be able to be really, for it to be really clear to them who they're communicating with and who is seeing what's going on in the various channels.
Yeah, I think for us, it's about utilizing our strengths to help out both sets of customers. So like a specific example is if you have spilled food, right? Like you might have a particular curry place that you love, but just like their packaging leaves a little bit to be desired, and so it means that it spills really often. And so what we do is when you report that to us, we say like, hey, can you take a photo of what's going on? And then we can take that internally, and then we can pass that on to our restaurant partner, and we can go to the restaurant partner and say, hey, you're getting a lot of reports of spilled food, we've got this great packaging store, why don't you have a wee discount on that, and we get you some nice eco-friendly packaging that then won't get spilled. So I think that's kind of the internal conversations for us, is like having the visibility over what's happening, so therefore we can do something to actually help out.
Yeah, so with Ancestry, again, there are a couple of variations here, right? One is our member services team, customer support, is talking to customers all the time and getting that information back to the team and collaborating on that regard. The other part is we have folks who work with our influencers on a regular basis, and we work with them to make sure that they have all the information that they can then go out to communicate with the influencers, who can then go out to the world and talk about what Ancestry is doing, or any new things that are just coming out. So it's always important for us to keep those channels always open, essentially.
Gotcha. And Jason said something that literally made me hear our chief counsel, Karen Smith's voice in my head that says, everything is discoverable. And so, how do you think about that piece of the puzzle, right? When you have all of these kind of threads and conversations and in all these different areas, I know it's sensitive for a few of you, but how do you think about that in the context of privacy and discoverability and those types of issues?
I mean, I think for us, it's incredibly important for us to protect our customers' privacy and their data. And if it wasn't important enough already, we have GDPR. Obviously, we operate in Europe, so it's super important for us to comply with that. And there's recently been, a couple of cases, both in the UK and over here, of folks getting, some decent fines for not being careful with their customers' data. So, we need to build that in from the ground up. We need to be thinking about, what's happening. How can we have auditability? How can we have visibility over it, and how can we just prevent you from make sure we're maintaining your privacy at all points in the journey?
Yeah, and I think for us similarly, we have, of course, at Podium, the importance of privacy and making sure that we're keeping the data of our customers safe. But when it comes to the businesses themselves, I mean, it's kind of interesting because in a lot of cases, we might be going to a dealership who's starting to use Podium for communication, and it's not that dealership wasn't texting their customers beforehand, and they actually kind of pretended not to know it, but their salespeople were all texting their customers and prospective customers from their personal phones. And so, which made, of course, the dealerships cringe, and they're nervous about that, and they'd rather not think about it. But Podium helps them to get out of that situation by providing a way for their customers to communicate with their employees on the same convenient channels. The reason they were texting is because they probably didn't answer the phone when they tried to call. So on the same convenient channels while maintaining the privacy needed so that when that employee leaves, if that employee leaves the business, the conversation is retained both for record keeping and for privacy reasons moving forward. And then of course internally, giving our customers the tools they need to ensure that those conversations are shared with the right people on an ongoing basis, and that there are people who need the context of what's gone on as they're working with that, that customer who maybe bought a car and needs service on that car, but that it's held in a private way.
Yeah, and I think about when you talk about situations like that, I think about the fact that we spend a lot of time and energy making sure, for example, if we have issues with the network or we have issues with an API or something like that, the folks that are posting that status to our status page are trained. They understand how to communicate it. They understand how to be succinct. And when you have, I think, individual conversations going on from, like you said, like Jeff said earlier, your BYOD, you bring your own device kind of things, you lose that control point. And it's really important that those conversations, especially with outside and externally, especially with your customers, that you have almost a point of control or a point of audit there that you can say, no, we don't use those kind of words with our customers. So, I think that's an interesting piece of it. I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah, one thing I would add to that is, because a lot of our conversations that we enable are between our customers, we make sure that if a customer doesn't want to be found by other customers, that we enable them to do that. If a customer doesn't want to be reached by very specific people, that they can easily block those users out. Things like that, right? Especially with all the information that's available out there, if they don't want where they're from or what their lineage is, we enable that very easily.
Yeah, I think for us, we try to attack that from the other angle as well, like try to help everybody kind of fall into this pit of success. So like a good example is for the riders, when they turn up, there's a whole bunch of like nicely written canned messages, and they can kind of like, with one tap, they can say, hey, it's your rider, I'm outside, da da da, and like instead of what they would normally do, which is just like try and type something as quickly as possible so that they can get on to the next delivery.
Do you see, and by the way, so if you notice on the slides there, feel free to join the conversation. We'll, I think, have some time for Q&A at the end. So just slido.com, #conversations. You can Slido your questions in, and we'll have an open mic as well. But feel free to send your questions in, and we'll get our esteemed panel here to answer some of those. And while we're waiting for that, do you see interest from your customers in engaging in a cross-channel way? In other words, do you get a lot of kind of, talk around WhatsApp versus, SMS versus, are you seeing that kind of need within your businesses?
Yeah, we're starting to see that, right? Our user base generally has tended, at least on the family history side, on the older side. But as we're expanding out the DNA business, there's younger users who are coming in. And a lot of the demand for other channels is coming from them for the most part, right? And especially as we look at expanding internationally too, right? Like WhatsApp is more popular in some other countries than here. So yeah, we're definitely starting to see that.
Yeah, I see ours mainly driven by two different things. One being international. So as our customers are handling transactions with their customers, increasingly outside of the U.S., that introduces more channels, as well as even within the U.S., based on where they're meeting the customer. So I mean, a great example of that is Facebook Marketplace, especially in the automotive world. That's increasingly becoming a place where people are shopping for cars. And so helping these auto dealers get in touch with the consumers in that place with the context of what's going on and the inventory they've been looking at is extremely important for those types of businesses.
Yeah, I think for us, our customers are somewhat like your daughter. They don't really see channels. As far as they're concerned, they're speaking with the rider or they're speaking with Deliveroo. So we just need to go to wherever they are and make sure we're in touch with them there. It's like really that simple. Like.
Yeah, spot on. So this is the big one. If you have the opportunity to start building with Conversations today, which you do, so exciting, where would you start? What would you do? And what advice would you give to the audience on, how to think about this?
Yeah, so the way we've thought about it in general is, in two ways, right? One is enabling these communities, enabling these groups for customers to communicate with each other. And remember, at Ancestry, it's more about customer-to-customer communication. So enabling that to happen, right? It's building out these tools is one thing. But to me, the more important thing is enabling or building out contextual entry points in the customer journey, right? So it's one thing to say, hey, there's this tool, but it'll be great for a customer to, get a little notification or something when it says, hey, there's this one person who's researching your family. Would you like to communicate with this person? So you can learn more about yourself or your family as well. So to me, I think that's an important thing.
Yeah, something that's interesting for us, and was mentioned in the keynote as well, is the case of perhaps across channel, but maybe even on the same channel, group conversations. So some of the customers we're helping communicate again with their customers, the end consumers, are working with families or business partners who are working together, and being able to keep them up to date and have a conversation the same way we all do with family and friends all day long in group messages is important for them. So that's an area where, as we look at conversations, we think about there's a lot of opportunity.
Yeah, I think if you're building today, it's kind of the thing about planting a tree, right? Like the best time to plant a tree is yesterday, but the second best time is right now. I think for us, having this stuff is super important. We already get the vast majority of our customer care contacts in through chat. We released the right at a customer chat, and then within weeks we had them all using it, and now everybody in the business is kind of saying more and more and more. So it's like, yeah, get onto it, and you'll find some really great outcomes for your business and for your customers.
Yeah, I love that. And it's, I was speaking with another customer earlier, and they're a voice customer, and they were talking about adding messaging to their experience for their customers, and they had just planned on building out SMS, and they said, I think I'm going to build out conversations instead. So I think it provides an amazing ability to kind of get it all in one place and start from there, as opposed to kind of adding on and adding those channels later. So with that, I'm not sure how much time we have left, but the mics are open. If you have any questions for Nick or Jason or Pramod, come on up to the mic or send them in via Slido, and our awesome voice of God in the back can read them from Slido, or it looks like we have a question at the mic.
Hey.
Be great to introduce yourself, by the way. I think part of the amazing thing about Signal is we all get to know who's using Twilio and how they're using it and the different use cases. So if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Tamir, I'm from Israel, and I have a company for digital transformation. So essentially people come to me with their technological issues, and I kind of move them from legacy systems to more advanced system, marketing automation, workflows, that kind of stuff. And my question is, how do you balance essentially the selection between channels and agent experience and automation? Because some platforms support all the channels, but they don't allow you as much automations. Let's say chatbots, you could only run chatbots on one channel, but not on other channels. You could go with two platforms, but then the agent has to answer the emails or the live chat in one window and then switch to other window to answer the WhatsApp and the Facebook Messenger. So essentially, how do you balance these kind of selections when you are starting to roll out a messaging strategy for a company?
What do you think? You are the experts.
I mean, I think for us, when we have a single pane of glass for the agents, they answer everything there, and it's kind of table stakes. The good thing with something like channels and what attracts us to technologies like that is that, from an agent perspective, we don't have to differentiate. If somebody's contacting us via chat or via an email, it comes into the same system. So.
Yeah, I think similarly for us, our customer using Podium is working from one centralized inbox where they're handling conversations of different types, and we have to be clear what's possible in the different conversations, and that there are limitations to, the different channels, and that there are limitations based on the channel. And then I think on the other side, when we're surfacing entry points for consumers to get in touch with those businesses, we're doing our best to do that based on what preferences we can understand about them. And that might be because we know of a channel they used most recently with that business, or it might be making our best guess based on their geography or the type of conversation they might be looking to start.
All right, thank you.
Sorry, how are we doing for time? Are we out? Or do you have a question in the back?
We're at time, but we have one question from Slido that appeared a few times, and that's about creating a unified experience for users where your customers might be on multiple channels or talking to multiple employees in the same thread, and how you approach that.
I mean, it's a tough one, right? Like you're essentially coming from a situation where something that people thought of as completely transactional, you know, a phone call. I think you mentioned this, and when we were chatting earlier, you mentioned like having a phone call over text. And it's super hard if you have these amnesiac conversations with a company where like you have a conversation and then just because you're talking with a different person on the agent side, they have no idea what's going on. I think for us, like, specifically, we've largely managed to avoid that. Most of our orders are delivered in 30 minutes or less. So like the hope is that you will only need to have a conversation with one person on our side. But it is something we're thinking about carefully. Like, what does that interaction model look like for persistent messaging? What does the history of my conversation with this company look like? I think most of us have kind of like a personal or family WhatsApp group, and you kind of just, I'm obviously 12 hours time zone difference from my family, and I can just pop something in there while they're all asleep, and they'll pick it up when they get up in the morning. And so I think it's an interesting question for us to solve in the future.
Cool. Well, I realize we're at time. Please join me in thanking our awesome, awesome panelists, Nick, Jason, and Pramod. Thank you so much, and thanks for your time today. Enjoy the rest of your signal. Thanks again.